Hello and welcome, I'm Riz Khan. At the start of this year, I set off on a mission to conduct interviews with some of the most prominent and interesting people around. As well as those directly connected with the news of the day, we wanted some interesting angles and perspectives from people who were making waves or encouraging us to think differently. A little over 6 months later, we've brought you more than 70 interviews with a cast including Bill Gates, Norman Finkelstein, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Andrew Tate, Tyson Fury, Omid Djalili, and Stuart Copeland. And in the months ahead, we'll be bringing you an even more diverse collection of charismatic contributors. But the sit-down which started it all was the Egyptian-American cardiothoracic surgeon turned comedian, Bassem Youssef. Having made a name for himself in the Arab world with comedy shows and political satire, he found himself at the center of the debate on Israel's military action in Gaza, following the surprise attack on Israel by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023. Well, turning his cutting humor to the funny bones of a wider global audience, Bassem was soon touring internationally with his stand-up comedy show in both Arabic and English. I caught up with him for a chat when his US tour stopped for 3 shows in Miami. The charming comedian with movie star good looks candidly discussed what took him from the operating theatre to the comedy theatre. And Bassem explained how the unlikely medium of comedy provided the perfect perspective to deliver incisive observations about the violence and politics of the Israel-Gaza conflict. Here's another chance to see Bassem Youssef in full flow as he discusses how he's had to adjust to comedy across cultures and English language as well as Arabic.
It's not about culture sensitivity as much as about delivery and style. So when you do comedy, it's not just about the material. It's not about the joke that you write. It's about the delivery, the cadence, the speed, the rhythm, and it's different from one language to another. It's different from one dialect to another. Yeah. So when I started doing English, I didn't do well because there's things that doesn't come natural to you with the cadence and the rhythm of the language, and I had to learn that. I had to learn that but it's all trial and error. And when I did Arabic, I learned a lot from the English, because I was doing the English for 5 years now, and now I'm doing Arabic stand-up that I've been touring for a year, and I had to actually learn a lot from the cadence and adjust it to my own language. So it's a lot of mental work.
It's quite a science.
It is a lot of science. Yeah.
Now, often when you're doing satire and humor around political things, you're often touching on sensitive, sometimes intense subjects. For example, now with Israel-Gaza, and I wonder what considerations you have to take into account, what boundaries you have to set when you're doing that.
No, when I do stand-up comedy gives you a lot of freedom, but I found out like the way that I connect with my audience is through personal stories. So the English show has a different theme than the Arabic show. By the way, they are totally different. It's not a translation.
Yeah.
The English show has its own story and theme and direction. The Arabic show has its own theme and direction. With the English show, I talk about my journey as someone who was a doctor, left medicine into a comedy show, into doing comedy in Egypt, left Egypt, came here as Trump was becoming president, and I'm coming here as an unwanted minority, and I joke about our journey as Arabs coming into America as immigrants. And there's a lot of jokes that could be done, not just about people not accepting us, but also about us as Arabs. It's more, there's a lot of self-deprecating jokes too. It's not about like white people, because I don't like that kind of comedy. I also like to self-criticize a lot. So it's a show that everybody is comfortable, whether you're white, whether you're brown, whether you're Arabic, whether from the Arab world, or whether you're somewhere else from the world. I have people from all kinds of, people from Latin America, people from Asia. People come and enjoy the show because I made it in a way that everybody can enjoy it. In the Arabic show, it's different. I talk about how difficult it is to speak to a group of people who are Arabs, and we speak the same language, but it's not the same language.
Right.
Because dialects in the Arab world is very, very varied. And no matter how people think, oh, but everybody understands Egyptian dialect, they understand the Egyptian that they see on television. But in the street talk, everyday talk, it's different.
Now, interestingly enough, one of the things you joked about when you were on Piers Morgan's show was referring to the situation in Gaza, people in Gaza being killed. You said you've been trying to kill your wife, and your wife is hard to kill because she uses the kids as human shields.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, that stuck with a lot of people. And I'm wondering to what extent, your wife felt comfortable about being part of the act.
Oh no, my wife is very cool. My wife is the coolest person ever. I think my wife is. I think she is the most. If I would choose one thing to describe her, is she is a grounding factor. She has been very grounded. She's been very supportive. She's seen me going through a lot of trouble, and the best thing that she innately knew how to do is just to be there and not to add any of my stress. Because sometimes, especially if you come from Middle Eastern culture, people around you will stress you out more if they care too much or more. Well, she's like she has faith. Like, are you okay? You need anything? Fine, I'm there if you need me. So she's very mature about things, and doesn't mean that she cares less.
On a serious note, how is your family doing? I know, of course, there's the concern of Palestinian background and the situation with Gaza.
They're closer now. They're between Khan Yunis and Rafah, and so far, I mean, we're lucky that no one of her direct family has been. I mean, they're casualties before, but so far, like, they're safe. So,
but communications difficult?
Very, very spotty, in and out. Yeah.
I wish them safety. How much pushback do you get when your humor goes into that kind of political satire on sensitive subjects?
Well, I've been having this pushback since I had my show in Egypt. At a certain point, people would support my humor as long as it actually fits well with their own political agenda. And when I turn against them, they hate me. And I've seen that happen many times to me. I had people who supported me when I was criticizing the Muslim Brotherhood, and when I criticized the army, they turned against me. I had people who loved me when I criticized the army, and when I went against the Islamists, they get against me. It's just that people, everybody think that they're cool with political satire until it really gets against what their own beliefs. So everybody pretends to be objective, but they're not really.
People want fingers pointed at everyone else, but not themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I have to point out, though, for those who don't know, that you must be the most highly qualified Arab comedian, Dr. Youssef.
Yeah, because of the medical part.
Yeah, well, cardiothoracic surgeon.
I wish that my skill in the skills that I acquired in the operating room operating theater will help me in real theater, but it doesn't translate now. Because if you bomb at a joke, you'll bomb. Nobody was like, oh, but he's a doctor. Nobody cares.
Do you ever regret leaving that career or putting it to one side? No, really?
No, I didn't like it. I say this, I've spent 19 years in medicine, 7 years as a medical student, and 12 years practicing, and I never liked a single moment of it. I was there because you had high grades, you had to go into medicine, and you go to medicine, you have to be there. And it's just like, I didn't find, that's the options that you're given. And I always say I was a heart surgeon, but my heart wasn't in it.
I used to joke that I dated a cardiothoracic surgeon once. It didn't turn out she was heartless. Sorry.
Yeah, well, we usually are. We usually are.
Yeah, you have to be clinical to some degree.
Yeah, we have to be very focused on the work at hand and kind of get out of our personal perspective.
Going back to being a comedian in Egypt, it can be quite a risky profession in the Middle East. I mean, if you target the wrong people, or if some comment goes out, how difficult did you find that?
Well, hindsight is 20/20. We look at it right now and we say, yes, that is the case. But when I started it, there was kind of an opportunity, a window of opportunity. Everything was fluid. There was a chance for everybody to speak up after the Arab Spring, and then that window kind of became smaller and smaller and smaller. And I tried to I worked within these boundaries. So I had the freedom, other people had the freedom. So at the beginning, that wasn't that bad. But as it went on, that window of opportunity was closing in. And you try to deliver the comedy as much as you can. And when you can't, I left. I mean, and I never claimed to be a hero or a political activist or someone who would just, I was just telling people I'm a comedian and you need to deal with me as such. And when you can't do it anymore because it's unsafe, people get disappointed, and that love turns into hate.
One man who was very much in the news earlier this year is the highly controversial influencer Andrew Tate, as he dealt with legal battles in Romania and the UK. The world seems rather split along the lines of his very loyal supporters who argue that his hugely outspoken perspective on masculinity has helped them find a path of confidence, and those who believe he's a very dangerous figure who's having a disastrous influence on young men, effectively turning them into aggressive misogynists. The controversy has earned him the label the king of toxic masculinity. But Andrew Tate argues he's not trying to be divisive, and that much of the perception people have is because he's a victim of the MSM, the mainstream media, whom he believes has cultivated a negative narrative around him. This is how he addressed it in the first of a two-part discussion I had with him at his home in the Romanian capital, Bucharest.
Well, I don't even see myself as divisive, and I think 99% of the world doesn't see me as divisive. And
you really think so?
I really think so. And what they say is toxic masculinity is simply masculinity in most of the world today. In fact, even in the countries now where they're going to try and pretend my message is damaging and dangerous, I say to men they should go work hard, get strong, go to the gym, be mentally disciplined, be stoic. All of these things were accepted by the entire population 10 or 15 years ago. I haven't changed my views. I haven't come up with anything radical or new. They've changed the parameters of what a man is. And they've lost their minds, not me. So I don't really believe I'm divisive. In fact, every single time a hit piece is published about me by the MSM, they turn the comments off. Please, you can check yourself. Every time the BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5, Australian news, whenever they try and do a hit piece on me, they have to turn the comments off because there's just thousands of comments saying you're wrong and he's right. A man should be a man and a woman should be a woman, and that's what makes families and society beautiful.
I'll get into that in a minute, but I mean, there are lots of people who love you. There are lots of people who hate you. So that is divisive, isn't it?
Well, I don't think you would have ever achieved anything in the world if you don't have certain people who hate you. That's fine. And there can be a contingent of the populace who hates me while I still remain eternally correct. I'm still right. That's fine. I mean, it's fine. And you could be the best thing in the world. It doesn't matter what you are. You can be a Ferrari and someone will hate you because you're too loud. I know what I'm saying is true. I know my message is overwhelmingly positive. I know I've had a massive positive impact on millions of people's lives. I know that in the end, as this arc completes and my innocence is proven, there's going to be a lot of people who have to apologize to me. If somebody wants to sit in their bedroom crying their eyes out because I said something they find mildly offensive, well, then I guess that's their problem.
Do you think there's any chance that you may have also had a very negative impact on many people's lives?
It's interesting you say that because I think if you actually want to be a professional, and like I said, I've analyzed all these things very non-emotionally, I think it's impossible to say anything positive doesn't have a negative impact under the right circumstances. There's no light without dark. Water is positive. You need water to live. You can drown in water. Music makes people happy. Yes, you can listen to music, you can feel happy, you can enjoy a party. It also sings about doing drugs. People become drug addicts. Like, I would like to believe my message is overwhelmingly positive. I tell people to train, to work hard, to make as much money as possible, to be stoic, etc. I'd be a liar if I couldn't sit here and say, well, I've convinced 100 million men to go to the gym and one of them dropped a dumbbell on his foot. Well, maybe, perhaps. I mean, but what can you do? You have to speak in generalities. Exceptions don't disprove the rule. My law, the things I'm saying are generally good things, and the rules are generally good. So for them to come along and attack me as they do, this is what's so disingenuous about the mainstream media, because this is exactly what they do. I'll teach men how important it is to be strong, go to the gym, and look after themselves. They will then see thousands of kids go to the gym and work hard. They will then find one kid who goes to the gym who's maybe autistic, maybe he's not socially well conditioned, maybe he had bad parents, who knows, who starts walking around the school saying, I'm strong, and bumping into people. Then they'll say, Andrew Tate did that, and they'll attack me. That's as asinine, that is as foolish as waiting for somebody to crash a car and see that they were playing a Taylor Swift song and start saying that Taylor Swift fans crash cars. Because most people listen to Taylor Swift and don't crash their car. So the whole MSM narrative against me is completely disingenuous.
In the second part of our conversation, Andrew Tate talked in detail about why he became a Muslim and why it seems that so many professional fighters in the West decide to embrace Islam as their faith.
Because it's a warrior's mindset, Islam. Islam understands the brutal realities of life, and the brutal realities of life as a man is constant and never-ending war. And I mean that for every man on earth. You're at war right now. If you're at home watching this, you're at war.
Well, that's the term jihad, but it usually means a self-struggle.
No, it's perfect. Even better, self-struggle. You nailed it. That's what I was about to say with war. Getting to your job and back without losing your temper in the commute is war. Taking care of your family is war. Raising your children, despite the government propaganda being injected into their ear, is war. Maintaining a healthy body and mind is constantly war. Paying your bills is war. Life as a man is war. And when you're truly a warrior in your heart and in your soul and in your actions, and you understand how important God is, you're going to end up believing in Islam. You're going to end up being a Muslim.
When it comes to religious tolerance, are you tolerant of other religions?
If you tolerate everything, then you stand for nothing.
I agree that tolerance is a strange word, but it's used widely to imply...
It's a hijack. Tolerance is a hijacked word. So tolerance in and of itself, just like we talked earlier about gender equality, is a hijacked word that the Matrix has hijacked and taken a nice pretty word and they've hijacked it. Because when they say you must be tolerant, what they're saying is move out your house, give it up to asylum seekers, allow your son to chop his balls off. That's what they're telling you to do. So tolerant is hijacked. However, my brother's a Christian. I live with a Christian. It's not my job to be an Islamic scholar. I don't know enough. I'm a revert. It's not my job to go through and tell other people about their own religion. It's not my job to insult other religions. I can only say why I stopped being a Christian, because I lost faith in the religion as a whole. That's my personal preference. That's all I can do. I'm tolerant of other religions. In fact, I think we need more God in the world, not less. I'm tolerant of religions. If I meet an atheist, perhaps I might look at him strange. Perhaps
you were for a while.
Well, yes, exactly. But perhaps I wouldn't do business with atheists anymore. Perhaps if someone sat and said, I'm an atheist, I would lose respect for them. I'll admit that openly on camera. But if someone were to sit and say, I'm a Christian, I'd say, okay, that's fine. Beautiful. You believe in God, I believe in God. The world needs more God. And I think that's very important. But this tolerant word, we have to be careful with. We have to be very careful with this word.
I agree. It's accepting, I think, is a better word than tolerance, because tolerance implies putting up with something.
But the reason it's so important to be careful with this word is because one of the core tenets of being a man is intolerance. If you're a man, you're intolerant. You have principles, and principles can't be broken, which makes you intolerant. You have duty, which means you can't have your actions changed or psyoped out of you, which makes you intolerant. You have land you're supposed to protect. You have your people you're supposed to protect, your family. You don't want strangers turning up in your house. You're intolerant of random guests at 3 a.m. If you're half good as a man, you're intolerant of a lot of things. So I would never sit here and call myself a tolerant man, because that makes me a walkover, and I'm certainly not a walkover. I am tolerant, sure, but not in this hijacked sense of the word where I'm going to allow myself and my people and those I care about to be decimated by the insane agents of Satan.
Andrew, interesting you say you're a revert, not a convert.
Yes.
Why?
Well, we all start as Muslims, is my understanding of it. Like I said, I'm not an Islamic scholar, but I think what I found most amazing about my reversion, to be honest with you, is how similar it was to Christianity. It's really not as far away as people believe it is. And I feel like, especially in the Western world, especially in America, because I'm American, the white Christians see it as this far away religion from a far away place, and it's very, very different. Not understanding that Christianity and Islam were born from the same period of same place on earth, right? And we respect and worship a lot of the same people. And it's a beautiful thing. So we all start as Muslims, is my understanding. And like I said, I'm very careful how I talked about these subjects, because there's people more intelligent than me. But it's closer to Christianity than I thought, which is also quite refreshing.
Are you ritualistic? I mean, do you pray 5 times a day? Is it something important to you? I'm not judging.
Sometimes I will pray 5 times in a day. I won't always manage to pray 5 times in a day. It's important to me, yes. I think it gives me a lot of mental clarity. I think it's a nice thing to do. I think if you don't have time in your day or you can't make time in your day for God, then what are you making time in your day for?
Over the years, the founder of Microsoft, Bill Gates, has gone from being seen for the longest time as simply the richest man in the world to evolving into a dedicated campaigner for global health issues, such as eradicating the crippling disease polio, but then finding himself at the center of conspiracy theories that included him being a megalomaniac who wants to control the world through microchips and vaccines. I've interviewed Bill Gates a number of times over the years, and earlier this year we met again, where he discussed his hopes for relegating some diseases to the rubbish bin of history, how surprised he was by conspiracies involving his name, and how he's encouraged to see philanthropy taking a greater hold among many wealthy people.
Well, I'd say that, in terms of generosity, that's always been global. It's, at the heart of the Christian and Muslim religion is that those who have a lot have a responsibility to give back. I'd say the new thing is to take this charitable money, whether from individuals or governments, and really be strategic, like creating a new vaccine or using a mapping approach to find all the children so we can get rid of polio, and really measuring all the results. So with such limited money to help poor people, we have to make sure that it's being spent very, very well, both on health and education or all the things that can lift people up.
And I know there's a greater challenge. You don't get involved with political commentary, but what we do see in this day and age is some really severe impact of conflicts. We see what's happening in Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Congo, 3 decades of that. These kind of conflicts, how much do they set back your effort to have some major impact?
Well, the conflicts are such a terrible thing. The loss of life, the destruction of property. It also means that the ongoing effort to help poor countries gets pushed down. Africa's got a lot of poor countries, but less money is going there as urgent issues around these conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine are now taking those very limited dollars. And so, yes, it's the goals that the world has set, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to miss those because of a combination of first the pandemic and now all of this instability.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I was reading how when we did that very in-depth interview in March 2014 with Rolling Stone magazine, you gave your thoughts on a various bunch of issues, from climate change and philanthropy, the state of America, and you said innovation is the real driver of progress at that time, and that America is way better today than it's ever been. Now, considering what we've seen in terms of China making so much progress, especially in technology, the serious competition is created for the US, and of course the current state of politics, would you still make that statement now?
Well, certainly China's done a lot of very impressive things in manufacturing, high-speed rail, but in terms of overall innovation, the U.S. is still unequaled. If you leave the country you're born in to go work with the best people in a subject area, mostly you're going to U.S. institutions. And so that's meant whether it's medicine or AI, the U.S. still has a lead there, even though these technologies fortunately get distributed globally and will benefit the entire world.
There's something else that caught me in that interview too. You said, asked about your greatest fear looking 50 years ahead. You said there will be some really bad things that will happen in the next 50 to 100 years, but hopefully none of them on the scale of, say, 1 million people that you wouldn't expect to die from a pandemic or nuclear or bioterrorism. And a few years, of course, later, we saw the COVID-19 pandemic. I think the estimates are nearly 3.5 million or something close to what it's taken. And I wonder how your views on the risks have changed when you look at that. I mean, you're fighting very hard to get that 1%, for example, with polio, and then you have all these other things that might be impinging on it.
Well, overall, the progress in health is phenomenal. Most people don't know we've gone from over 10 million children under 5 dying every year to now we're under 5 million. And so even though that's plateaued out with the pandemic and instabilities, it's something we can be very proud of. We got all these new vaccines out to the world's children, and that is the primary reason we were able to cut the deaths so much. Now we need to get back to cutting it in half again, but the financial situation, the instabilities meant that we're moving a lot more slowly than I would hope. I had predicted there was a risk of a pandemic, and sadly, that came true. We're past that. Now we need to get people working together in partnership and taking innovation and applying it to help the very poorest in the world.
And so much has changed in the past 2 decades, perhaps even the past few years in terms of media. Is the media, now we've got social media, of course, in the mix, is it your friend or enemy now?
Well, certainly I work with the media to get the good news out about how we've reduced deaths and where there's challenges. And, I want citizens of generous countries to feel proud of the work they're doing. Saudis should feel proud. Now they're on the polio eradication team. We need more of that generosity. And so the media is the way that we help people learn about it.
And of course, it's, you must get really frustrated with all the conspiracy theories. They just never seem to go. Do you think you'll ever get over those? They say, about vaccinations and chips and so on.
Well, up until the pandemic, I hadn't thought of that as a big phenomenon. I was completely taken by surprise at those conspiracies, and some of them centered on me, and some of them were, exactly the opposite of the truth. Vaccines have saved more lives than any other tool, and yet they came under attack.
Another of my guests who's often linked to conspiracy theories is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of the late Bobby Kennedy, the US lawyer and presidential hopeful, who was assassinated in June 1968, almost 5 years after his brother, President John F. Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s uncle, was also shot and killed. RFK Jr. was on a presidential campaign trail when I caught up with him in Raleigh, North Carolina, where, among other things, he told me that he saw both the Democrats and Republicans as parties of war, saying he would wind down the US's military empire abroad, and gave some thought to how he would deal with the conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, it's a proxy war. I mean, the real fulcrum of the war is over the extension of NATO into Ukraine and the extension of NATO across all of Europe. We agreed in 1992 when Gorbachev moved his troops Russian troops out of East Germany and allowed us to reunify East Germany under NATO. We agreed not to move NATO to the east, and since then we've moved it into 14 countries. We put Aegis missile systems, which are nuclear capable, in Poland and Romania. We could deliver nuclear payload loads to Moscow within 12 minutes, so we could decapitate the entire Soviet leadership in 12 minutes. We walked away from the two nuclear weapons treaty, the intermediate treaty that we had signed. We unilaterally walked away. Well, naturally, Putin has national security anxieties, the same ones that my uncle had when the Russians put Soviet missiles in Cuba. I'm not making excuses for Putin. Putin had other options, and Putin is who Putin is, and I'm not a supporter of Putin's. My uncle always said you have to put yourself in the other guy's shoes, and that's not happened here. Nobody, our greatest diplomats, George Kennan, who was the architect of the containment policy during the Cold War, Bill Pierce, head of the CIA, Bill Parry, who was the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, all said, we're going to resign if you move NATO into Ukraine because you're forcing the Russians into a violent response. Now, I'll just say this. The Russians 2 times have come to the negotiating table and worked out term sheets with President Zelensky that they were ready to sign. And in both cases, the U.S. torpedoed those agreements, one in April of 2022, and the other was the Minsk Accords. And we forced Zelensky not to sign those agreements.
I'm going to ask you, as we're running out of time, I'm going to ask you about the home front now, the US view. In the USA, gun violence obviously raises its ugly head regularly. That's an issue you have to deal with. You're also divergent from the MAGA, the Make America Great Again movement on that front, and abortion, affirmative action. What is your perspective? How will you win over the voter base? That's very strong.
I'm not going to talk about winning over the voter base. I'm talking about staying true to my principles. And I've fought for medical freedom for as hard as anybody in the world, I would say. That people ought to have autonomy over their own bodies, that a government shouldn't be telling people what to do. And I think every abortion is a tragedy. Nobody wants to have one, but the choice should not be left for the government. We have to trust women. We have to trust the mothers on that issue. On the gun issue, we have a Second Amendment in this country. I believe in the Constitution. The Supreme Court has given a very, very expansive reading of the Second Amendment so that it's almost impossible to regulate guns. I'm not going to take anybody's guns away as president. I will say this. We ought to be investigating the reason, the school shootings in this country, the mass shootings are unacceptable. And we need to be investigating why they're happening in this country. Why are we alone? Why is that happening? Why did it never happen before? 2 of the culprits that ought to be investigated, I'm not saying that we know this, but one is SSRIs, the widespread use of this class of psychiatric drugs. that has a black box label on it saying may cause homicidal and suicidal behavior. And we now have a large part of the American population on those. The other is, other issues like video games. NIH, the National Institute of Health, ought to be studying why is it that Switzerland, which has comparable levels of guns, has not had a mass shooting in 21 years, and we have one every 21 hours. Why is that? That is, when I was a kid, kids my age were bringing their rifles to schools for shooting clubs. Nobody ever blinked at that. Nobody ever started shooting at other children in the schools. It just didn't ever happen before. This is unique in human history, and we need to be studying that. Since 1996, NIH has had a policy not to study the etiology or the origins of gun violence, and I'm going to change that.
When it comes to a very direct, no-holds-barred conversation about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there are few who can match Professor Norman Finkelstein, the controversial American political scientist and activist who specializes in Holocaust history. His writings on how he feels the word Holocaust has been misused by Israelis and Jews has put him firmly on the wrong side of those who lobby and advocate for Israel, and it's all the more surprising since his parents survived the Holocaust. It had been some years since I had interviewed Professor Finkelstein, but his criticism of Israel's leadership is no less feisty, especially as we discuss developments that had led to rulings by the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice that both pointed fingers at Israel for its prolonged military campaign in Gaza following the Hamas attacks of October 7, 2023. As is often the case, the words Holocaust and genocide remain very contentious points of discussion in the mainstream media, and Professor Finkelstein was keen to give his perspective.
There are two aspects of this usage of the word genocide. I'll get to Holocaust in a moment. There is what you might call a common understanding of the term genocide, a non-technical term. On October 9th, when the Israeli Defense Minister, Mr. Gallant, when he stated that we are going to deny any food, fuel, water, or electricity to the people of Gaza. And as all of your listeners know, Gaza is, as Israel's former head of the National Security Council put it in March 2004, Gaza is a huge concentration camp. It is sealed shut from the outside world. Half of its population are children. If you deny any food, fuel, water, or electricity to a captive population sealed off from the world in the huge concentration camp, then you are in effect issuing a death sentence on that population. Prime Minister Netanyahu announced that this was going to be, from the beginning, from October 8th, he announced this was going to be a very long military operation. If you add those two sentences up, no food, fuel, water, electricity for a very, very long time, now stretching into 7 months. So it seems to me, by the commonsensical definition of genocide, Israel is carrying out a genocide in Gaza. As to the second question you asked, the question of the use of the term Holocaust, I would say personally that the Palestinians do not need recourse to the Nazi Holocaust or any need to appropriate its terminology in order to demonstrate the magnitude of the horror that's being inflicted on Gaza. If you read the reports that have been issued by the United Nations and various agencies, they described the conditions in Gaza as being catastrophic, disastrous, apocalyptic. And at a certain point, several of the senior officials stated that we have run out of words. So I myself would prefer to avoid getting in these meaningless, idiotic arguments about whether or not this is a Holocaust like the Holocaust that the Jews endured during World War II, and just stick strictly to the factual record as it's been laid out by responsible, objective international agencies. What's happening in Gaza is at this point, and I would like your listeners to pay heed to what I'm saying. What's happening to the people of Gaza, according to numerous senior UN officials, has now reached the point, not metaphorically, but literally, it's reached the point of beyond words. They can't even find a vocabulary to describe what has been done to those people by the state of Israel.
The reason I bring that up is I wonder what that does in terms of, people's perceptions, how it affects the psyche. Of course, Holocaust is a very strong word. So if Israel says what happened on October the 7th is another Holocaust, people tend to see it in a particular way. And I'm wondering just briefly what your perception is on the use of Holocaust by Israelis and supporters of Israel in describing any attack on Israelis.
Israel has systematically, methodically cheapened by overusage, by promiscuous usage, by politically driven usage of the term Holocaust and the actual event of the Holocaust, to the point that it has, I would say in my personal case, it doesn't even affect me anymore, but that's because I've studied and documented Israel's political usage and exploitation of the Nazi Holocaust for several decades now. But I think at this point, for example, if you remember Prime Minister Netanyahu, at one point he said the whole idea of the extermination of the Jews came not from Hitler, but came from the Mufti of Jerusalem, the Palestinian leader at the time. And now, if you listen to Gilad Erdan's speeches at the United Nations, in which every other word invokes the Nazi Holocaust, saying that Iran is Hitler, Iran is out to conquer the world, Iran is out to exterminate the Jews. At this point, the whole usage of the term Holocaust has been reduced to a complete and total trivialization of what Jews endured during World War II.
On something of a lighter note, I finally got to sit down with one of my favourite comedians, Omid Djalili. And though I'd never laughed so much during an interview, there were some serious undertones to the conversation I had with him. The talented British-Iranian was happy to talk about how comedians often end up being advocates for political causes, whether it be intentionally or not. He also addressed how news events can create stereotypes that affect the entire population of a country by default, referring in particular to Russians and Iranians due to the prejudices they often face for simply being from those nations. And he offered his views on the direction Iran might take with a new president at its helm after a helicopter crash took the life of Ibrahim Raisi in May.
I think in general, certainly when we had the whole Mahsa Amini kind of revolution in Iran, it kind of hit a lot of us in a very visceral way because, again, as a Baha'i, I've seen so many Baha'is have been persecuted, and I think something triggered in me that a woman who just had showed a few strands of hair, and the people protesting against that have been shot in the face or killed. Hundreds of people have died. I think I felt I really wanted to help the people of Iran. So in the sense, the first thing they do in a revolution is they cut the internet. So you've only got a couple of Telegram channels. The tip of the iceberg is maybe 100 videos come out where maybe 1,000 are uploaded. So I wanted to use my platform to speak for the people of Iran. So they would say things in Persian and I would decipher it. And you can't just press Google Translate. It doesn't always make sense. So I'm trying to make it palatable for a British journalistic audience. So I was very, very honoured that Emily Maitlis and John Serpol from the News Agents podcast, they voted me as one of their People of the Year because they used to just visit my Twitter feed to see what's going on in Iran. And I actually gave them stories. It gave them things to actually play with because they weren't getting any news. The only news you get is from the Islamic regime, which they couldn't really trust. So in that sense, I wanted to just use my social media as a service to the people of Iran to see what they would, so they would have a voice.
The irony is, the twist in the story is that you're a London lad.
Yes.
You know, and you're talking, about Iran. You're not a Muslim, you're a Baha'i, and we'll get into that in a second as well. So it's ironic, you're representing probably what people wouldn't understand really what you're representing.
Yes, actually a lot of Muslims have said to me, look, why don't you just become a Muslim, because we'll use you as a poster boy and you'll become a millionaire overnight. And I've had that with Jews as well. I've played a couple of Jewish roles. The last thing I played Reb Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. And all the Jews came down from London to Chichester where I did it. They goes, I'll just say you're Jewish, you'd be so... So they want me to represent, but in a sense I am representing because I'm of the Semitic race. And I do believe that we are a race. We have a certain kind of DNA. And I'm happy to represent any minority, but I am who I am. But I also have this, I suppose, as you get older, you just have this sense of moral obligation to stand up for the weak and the oppressed. And if I can do that in a very small way, then that's using my social media in a good way.
I love the sketch you did, one of your comedy stand-ups, about being Iranian yes. from the UK,
yes.
and having to say you were Ukrainian when you went. and this is one of the problems, especially in the US, and we both spend a lot of time there. There's a blanket judgment on people from Iran.
Yes.
It's a lack of understanding. It happens with the Arab world, with Muslims and everything else. How do you feel when you see that a whole race, a whole people, if you like, nationality gets tarnished with this
yes.
brush? And
I think that's something, for example, from the very early on after October 7th, I did notice that there were certain things that they were talking about people in Gaza all being human animals and then saying we're going to cut the electricity and cut the food and water. So I just said, this is what happens. Everyone gets tarnished with the same brush. And I was just saying, let's not dehumanize people. And then a lot of my Jewish friends said, look, they're talking about Hamas. And I was like saying, yeah, but it's not, that nuance is not being made clear. They're saying everyone in Gaza no one's an innocent in Gaza, and they're all human animals in Gaza. And that dehumanization leads to violence and leads to innocent people dying. So I think that is always the sense of nuance on social media and everywhere. This is the thing we have to guard against, human beings being dehumanized. And because I sense it because I'm Iranian and people assume I'm one thing, but actually they don't see that actually I come from a faith that believes in the oneness of mankind and the unity of religions. But, the guy stamping your passport doesn't know that. He just sees Iranian guy and he sees someone not to be trusted. I wouldn't say that I'm a terrorist, but it's just like, what's your father's name? Ahmed. Okay, that's my father's name. Okay, what does he do? And they will ask everything about what my father. He goes, well, he made shoes. Really? Where? And they ask these questions about my dad.
Especially as there was a shoe bomber.
There was a shoe bomber. Yeah, exactly. There was a shoe bomber. So that's the red flag if you say he worked in shoes. It's a whole can of worms. So I think that's the thing that we have to, as someone who's working in the West, just by doing a show and everyone laughing and enjoying it, they think, okay, all right, that's kind of shifted my particular viewpoint of those people, because comedy is such a powerful thing. If you can make people laugh about your culture. I remember feeling very strongly about Russian people. When Russia invaded Ukraine, I made a big thing about we have to just hey, let's not dehumanize all Russians just because of Putin. So I was doing Russian jokes in my show. I said, here are some jokes about Russians. And actually, I remember I heard this joke and made me think, oh, wow, Russians have a great sense of humor. And the joke was that you can't, during communism, you couldn't buy a car unless you like booked it 10 years in advance. And then you get the car 10 years later. He goes, congratulations, pick up your car in 10 years' time. And the guy goes, is that morning or afternoon? He goes, what difference is 10 years? He goes, I've got the plumber coming in the morning.
That's right.
See, that's a great joke. It's a Russian joke. So even the Russians can make fun of their situation. So I think it's very important to realize that comedy is a great leveler. Comedy makes you feel much closer towards a people, a culture, because it makes sense of everything, because it works on a human level.
It's very hard because, of course, in Iran, when everything is kind of restricted, it's very difficult for people to express themselves. Yes. And of course, you had mentioned the protests. I wonder, do you feel that anything might change since President Ibrahim Raisi was killed in a helicopter crash?
Raisi died in a helicopter crash, and you know it's something that made worldwide news, and people were doing jokes about that. It's a difficult one to talk about with change, because people have always wanted change from literally a couple of months after the Islamic Revolution of 1979, people were calling for change straight away. They didn't think this was going to be a hardline Islamic kind of hardline extremist revolution, so there was a lot of pushback there. I think change is inevitable because we're living in a world where, just with TikTok, I mean, I know certain social medias are controlled, but when young people are seeing that people are living a free life and you don't have the same freedoms inside Iran, the young people are going to protest. They are going to say, what is this? So change is inevitable. The big question is, will that regime be changed, or will the regime themselves change? And from what we see, where they're cracking down even more, I don't see any change coming from that particular regime.
I want to wrap up this retrospective on some of the shows that we've brought you over the past 6 months with a look back at the interview I had on fairly short notice with the charismatic and giant boxing champion Tyson Fury. He was in Riyadh to fight the tough Ukrainian Alexander Usyk in a much anticipated bout nicknamed the Ring of Fire, a match he ultimately lost, although their promoters were quick to set up a rematch for the end of 2024. I ended my interview with Tyson by asking him 10 quick-fire questions. The first, that he answered with no hesitation, was, if you could go up against any boxer in history, who would it be?
Tyson Fury.
Would you go up against yourself?
I would.
The mirror?
I'd go up against myself.
Is no one else? All right, who'd be second then?
I'm not really. Alexander Usyk.
Okay, well that's on the cards now already.
For sure. Yeah,
okay.
So I'm getting my dream fight then.
We've seen Conor McGregor enter the world of movies. If you're in a movie, which character would you play? What sort of character?
Would I play, or who would play me?
Well, let's start with who you would play.
Who would I play?
Yeah.
I'd play myself in the movie of Tyson Fury's life.
Is there anyone who could play you, though?
Probably only one person.
Tyson Fury.
No.
Oh.
Denzel Washington.
Oh, that's a great match.
Yeah, because he's very articulate and very, very, very good at acting. So
What makes a good boxer, Tyson?
A good boxer is someone who can think on a dime, someone who has all the slices of the cake, mentality, physicality, brutality, all of that stuff.
Will you become the first billionaire boxer?
Billionaire boxer? Not interested.
You know? I thought the money was important.
No, the money's important. You're getting paid for what you do. We're all here because we're getting paid, aren't we?
I thought I'd heard somewhere you'd said that you'd be the first billionaire boxer.
Oh, no. I don't think I've ever said I'm going to be the first billionaire boxer, but listen, I'm getting paid well for what I do, and I'm very grateful and very, very happy with my wages.
So next question, where would you rather be, New York or Morecambe, Lancashire?
Morecambe, hence the reason I live there. I could be in New York if I wanted to be.
Mike Tyson is approaching 60 and about to make a comeback with Jake Paul. Any chance you'd lace your gloves up at that age?
You never say never. I suppose if you're getting paid a lot of money and, you know, it's something you enjoy to do, then who is anyone to say don't do it? You know, I'm sure Mike enjoys what he's doing and he's having fun, so who am I to say do or don't?
Couple of quickies off the top of your head. Who has a better chance in the ring, Batman or Superman?
Batman.
Well, you dressed up as him once.
Yeah.
And what about Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan?
I'd say Bruce Lee.
Okay. And Frank Warren and his longtime rival, Barry Hearn?
I'd say Frank Warren.
All right, last one then. We've heard some of your songs, including American Pie and Sweet Caroline at the end.
Yeah.
Which is the next one you're going to do?
You'll have to find out Saturday night.
Look forward to it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.
Thank you.
And there we have to bid you farewell. Thank you very much for your support and interest in our programming over the past half a year. We hope to bring you much more in the coming months. Until next time, from me and the team, a warm goodbye.